the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, thanks for pulling up so quickly. We got connected to each other on that Dave Smith thread, and quickly identified that we had some things in common. And so I just am getting to know you, and I'm sure my audience, most of them probably don't know you. So give me the Cliff Notes version, man. Who are you and what you do?
I do a great many things, and yeah, it was definitely nice to kind of DM back and forth over the last day
Mm,
to kind of talk about all the stuff we have in common. But yeah, I am a guitarist. I'm a husband, a mechanic by trade. What else? Podcaster, athlete, libertarian, and yeah, I think that kind of covers most of the stuff that I do. I host a couple podcasts, but yeah, the In Liberty and Health podcast, I've interviewed many people, including Dave, and I'm kind of honored to say that he's somewhat of a friend of mine, and
mm,
some other bigger names in the Liberty sphere and outside of that sphere. I like to lift heavy things quite a bit. I've been playing music for almost 20 years. I've been fixing cars for about 13 years now, and yeah, I think. Oh, yeah. The other podcast I host is 5 till midnight, and then whenever Brandy is done being a mother, we'll probably return to our old show, Cognitive Vigilance. And I also host Post Zero, which is a podcast mainly about just dudes talking on Sunday. So yeah, I do quite a bit. I stay pretty busy, but I wouldn't have my life any other way because I absolutely love everything that I do, and that's kind of a testament to my relatively positive outlook all the time. So you may not get that off of Twitter, but I think most people who talk to me know that I'm a pretty upbeat and happy person overall.
No, that's good. That's good. And I did pick that up because typically, and this is why I've stayed away from libertarian politics a lot, is it's a cesspool oftentimes, man, and it's toxic and it's just a bunch of infighting and backstabbing, and I think you and I vibed on that because I'm always looking for ways to move forward together towards our shared goals, and it feels like not a lot of folks, at least the ones I've encountered on Twitter. Maybe in real life it's different, just don't seem to share that goal, man. So seeing some positivity, see some constructive feedback, and I listened to the stream last night too, the space with Dave, and I heard your inputs there, and I think that you were one of the people that was called out as being a little bit more on the positive side, more on the constructive side, even though you and I sort of take the alternate view to Dave and Angela and those folks.
Mhm. Yeah, and like I said, I consider all those people good friends. Angela and Jacob have been on my show multiple times. Dave's been on before. And this past year, I had so many people begging me to agree with them and to finally confirm their worldview and to finally have me vote Trump after 3 elections where I have not voted for Trump. I mean, I voted for Gary Johnson in 2016. I voted for Joe Jorgensen, and I actually donated to her campaign in 2020. Not a lot of money, just a little bit.
Mhm.
And then this year I just chose to abstain because I couldn't stomach the thought of voting for Chase Oliver. I absolutely despise Donald Trump as a politician. I love him as a person, but I despise him as a politician. And I've never voted for a Democrat, and I probably never will in my entire life. So I wanted it to be a constructive conversation. And DL, another good friend of mine, had said that I was the most concise person. And it's because I didn't necessarily go there to have a war with somebody. It was more of to
Mhm.
kind of put the ideas in people's heads where I don't hear the stuff that I talk about enough. And I have a following, I have some subscribers, and people listen to me a little bit. But my goal in a lot of this whole libertarian stuff is to kind of direct people's eyes more towards what was called the pivot to Asia back in 2011, done by the Obama administration, which basically said that, okay, well, we no longer want to fight terror wars. We want to move over to what they're calling great power competition between, the three great rivals, which number one, which it has been since day one, and people don't talk about this enough, but China, number
Mhm.
two is Russia, and the number three is Iran. North Korea is kind of in there as well, but those are kind of like the big three. So, obviously with the proxy war in Ukraine, there's a lot to talk about there, and there's people who are much more knowledgeable than I am on that topic. While I still do like to believe I know a little bit more than the average person, my focus is more so on China and the arms buildup, what is really the largest arms buildup in the world since World War II, directly pointed at China. Um, So I don't hear a lot of people addressing this, and this is something that Trump and his administration are very explicitly bad on, and that even a lot of the right kind of missed their chance to knock Biden and Kamala for as bad as they were on that, because there was a lot of bad things done under the Biden and Kamala administration, specifically with this whole pivot to Asia, where Kamala Harris went over to the Philippines and signed arms guarantees, where they basically said, "Hey, Philippines, if China's to screw around in these reefs called like Second Thomas Shoal and some of these other disputed reefs between you and China, if they go around and screw around these reefs, we will go to war with China over these reefs." Them also negotiating with Japan to double their military budget by 2025, specifically aimed at China. AUKUS, which is I think it's the United States, the UK, and Australia. They have this arms alliance where the US is now starting to funnel more arms over to Australia to kind of use them as like a beachhead to, basically box in China. There was also conversations with President Modi of India to, once again, kind of get on good footing with him to help box in China. And then obviously the Taiwan issue, and they're the third largest recipient of foreign aid as of recently. And there's been a lot of talk about Taiwan where basically like, hey, if China were to take Taiwan, then the U.S. should militarily intervene and protect Taiwan. When, we're talking about a country that isn't necessarily recognized as a country. There's a very, very like nuanced and complicated situation here between Taiwan and China. And the U.S. is doing everything they can to exacerbate, and if I could say that word, but basically cause tensions in this region because they look at Taiwan as a strategic asset because it's where we get a lot of our chips from, even though we make these chips at home with just a little bit of time and a little bit of taking the boot off Americans' necks. This is something that we libertarians talk about a lot. But Taiwan's part of this as well, where just in the last couple of years, we started just giving them aid and giving them arms. And while we haven't declared what they call strategic clarity, which is to say, we recognize Taiwan as an independent country, we've done a lot to kind of tiptoe around basically doing that. And the Trump administration that's coming in now, they're all gung-ho about fighting a war with China. And this has, been longstanding policy, even from the last Trump administration and obviously through the Biden administration. So I know I kind of threw a lot out there, but like, this is kind of what I don't hear addressed enough. And then also some of the Israel stuff, like anti-BDS laws being on the books, which is basically if you're a public sector worker, then you are required by law to sign a pledge to say that you will not criticize Israel, or else you can and will be punished. You will be fined. You can be thrown in jail over this stuff. Somebody that I really look up to, Abby Martin, actually had a fine and had a whole lawsuit down in Georgia over her activity with anti-BDS, which basically saying that you should boycott, divest, and sanction the state of Israel. And generally, this is done under the guise of their treatment of the Palestinians. So I don't hear people talk about any of this stuff. And Trump signed those anti-BDS laws in 2019. So my goal is to just kind of push some of this stuff into the conversation, because a lot of people get a lot of this stuff, I think, wrong, and it's to our own detriment. And, nobody wins a nuclear war when it comes to China, because I think they have like 500 nukes right now, but that cannot happen. That absolutely cannot happen. And it's something that, like I said, I think we as libertarians need to be screaming this from the rooftops, and I just don't see that enough.
Got it. And I agree. I have not seen much focus on China. And this is where I think the majority of the libertarians I've seen online, they seem to focus on the Ukraine stuff. Like that is front and center, talking about the war hawks that are being appointed to the cabinet, and in Israel and the regional war in the Middle East. Like I have not seen that much talk about China unless it's with respect to tariffs. Like that seems to be the center of that conversation, right?
Yeah, people are, and it's sad that like this even needs to be said, but tariffs really do fall on the American consumer. And there's been paper after paper after paper about this, where the Trump tariffs, 94% of those tariffs, excuse me, fell on the American consumer. We only get like 3% of the steel, in our country from China. So like these tariffs didn't even really make a lot of sense. Now, to add a little caveat and to throw a bone to perhaps the more dissident right people who favor tariffs, and then obviously your normie cons that favor this kind of stuff. If you're using that as an incentive to create manufacturing jobs at home, I get it. I don't think that's ideal, but I guess it works. But if we just look at Trump's first administration, the trade deficit soared with China, and we ultimately lost that trade war. Once again, American consumers paid those tariffs. China didn't.
Hey, sorry about that. I had a little bit of technical difficulties. As you were saying.
Yeah, technology is absolutely fantastic when it works, but yeah, a lot of these more right-leaning people have a hard on for China, and I don't understand it because if we're being honest here, China as a manufacturing economy, which they largely have become over the last, 20, 30, 40 years, they've lifted up their own people's living standards and also in turn lifted up our own living standards because we get a lot of goods from China. And people could say, yeah, they make cheap stuff and it breaks. Some of that's true, but then again, I mean, like, there's probably a whole ton of like guitar gear and stuff that I have in here that was manufactured in China that I use and that's reliable. And I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that you have in your house that says made in China that's reliable. So, you know, RFK had a pretty good take on this early on in his presidential campaign where he said, like, they're an economic competitor. So why don't we win that competition? I mean, I
Hmm.
think that's a pretty simple statement. And I was on with my buddy Tommy Salmons on his podcast Year Zero, and we were kind of talking about this. And China's the whole situation with China. People look at them as an expansionist power, which is kind of funny because, like, you know, if it really every accusation is like a confession. So, like, China is going around the world with a briefcase, whereas the U.S. is going around the world with bombs, right? And you tell
Yep.
me which one is more preferable for the country that's receiving said bombs or briefcase. I think 10 times out of 10 people are going to choose briefcases over bombs. So, while I think like the fears of de-dollarization and BRICS rising are kind of overblown because BRICS is still, I don't want to say like a joke, but like these countries are still very, very poor. I mean, like China, they're still doing 30% of their agriculture by hand, where like here in the US, we do like 2 or 3% by hand.
Yep.
Their country, like, GDP per citizen is way, 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 way lower than that of the US. Is the only reason why their GDP looks really big is because they have a big population. Um, Also, they have astounding rates of obesity, and it's not because of like they're fat or anything like that, like we are here in America. It's because they're so malnourished in some parts of the country that they get diabetes from that. So I understand the fear because they're really building themselves up, but like this is not to be worried about. And they're not expansionist. Once again, they're doing this whole Belt and Road initiative down through Africa. And I think this is largely because they want to create what they call the Silk Road, which is basically to have like a large, railroad where they can trade and operate throughout Africa. And the one piece of this that actually completes this whole Belt and Road initiative is actually the Xinjiang province where the Uyghurs are, which, if people are familiar with this, in 2019, there was all these accusations of the Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang province being, there was genocide being put upon them. And to anybody that's kind of familiar with this, there were a lot of bombastic claims that sounded really bad. Organ harvesting, and these people were being put into re-education camps, and once again, genocide. And they're being, what was it, IED insertions or IUD insertions, which are basically devices that are supposed to stop pregnancies. There's a guy named Adrian Zenz who works for, I think it's like a think tank or something like that from Germany, who put out this paper alleging that the Uyghurs were being genocided in the Xinjiang province. Now, why does all this matter? Because where the Belt and Road Initiative would basically finish and where Africa would meet into China is right here at this province conveniently. So, wouldn't it be convenient if the U.S. wanted to stomp out China from having access to this region by creating an uprising because, hey, your people are being genocided, quote unquote, and you guys should rise up and overthrow your government here in this area because this is very strategically beneficial for China. Very, very ironic that. So, now I know a lot of people might be getting like absolutely, revulsed and absolutely think that I'm a monster because I'm denying the Uyghur genocide. Okay, well, Adrian Zenz had to retract the paper that he published stating that there was a genocide going on in Xinjiang because he actually made a numerical error where he moved a decimal point over, and the IUD insertions were actually like they were off by a factor of like 10 or something like that. So the people who I know, who I've talked to on my show, who have been there, none of them clarify these claims. Um, there were re-education camps, and I'm not saying that everything there was perfect, but some of these people did do absolutely horrific things. They committed, what people would generally refer to as like terrorist attacks in malls. They've killed people. So once again, not that this justifies any of this stuff, but like there was definitionally no genocide. And what they kind of lean on now is like a cultural genocide to say that, like, oh, because they were put in re-education camps, that they were being genocided that way. It's a pretty loose definition, and you could really indict a paper bag with the term genocide when you actually look up the definition. So I had this guy, Sean Smith or Jason Smith on my show, who actually lives in China. And he said when he went to the Xinjiang province, he was like, it was actually a very, very nice area. The people there were very culturally rich. They were very welcoming. And once again, at one point, there probably was some heinous shit going on, but it did not rise to the levels of genocide. In comparison to like what we did, the US did to Yemen, or what Israel does to the Palestinians. So there's like just this whole China stuff that, as I said earlier, people just don't talk about enough. But I think in the coming decades, this is going to be a real big thing, and we need to talk about this more and more and more.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is you're being paid off by the Chinese, right?
Listen, dude,
Kyle's a shill.
Yes. If I was a CCP shill, those would not be empty. Those Tiger Fitness supplements behind me wouldn't be empty. That Marshall would not be an MG 100FX, right? I mean, this would be, I would have, the beautiful big Randall double stack with Celestian vintage 30s in it, the rig, and I would have all my dream guitars. I have some of them, but I would have all of them without a doubt. And, life would be a lot better for me. I wouldn't live in, small town Vandergrift if I was being paid off by the CCP. But, just like a lot of this stuff, like I said, it requires a lot of nuance. And basically, I want people to understand that, like, hey, China, I'm sure there's probably some stuff there that we wouldn't agree with. But, like, honestly, China's kind of more capitalist than the US at this point. I mean, once again, they go all over the world wanting to trade with people, wanting to maintain good relations. And to that point of like the whole Belt and Road Initiative, they've actually forgiven some of these loans. They've forgiven them. They have a very, very low interest rate. Whereas, what do we do globally? We have 1/3 of the entire global population under US sanctions. And then we're complaining about China manipulating their currency. We printed, what was it, 20 or it was like 40% of all dollars in circulation in 2020. But we point the finger at China and say they're, manipulating their currency. We fund a literal genocide in Gaza. And like you could actually indict the Israelis for that by the definition, because I mean, they've bombed maternity wards, hospitals. They killed 1,000 people in a week. I mean, it is just absolutely abysmal what they've done there. So you could definitively, indict the IDF for genocide, where, I'm sure they've done some bad things to the Uyghurs in China, but just nowhere near to the things that are being done to children in Gaza. I mean, 20,000 children in the last year, absolutely awful.
Yeah, and you raised some important points, and one of the things that I always wonder, especially because I've been to China, and it was
Oh, interesting.
it was a
Yeah.
terrible experience. I couldn't wait to get out of there. It was
Okay.
very,
Very
I mean,
interesting.
sorry to bring a counterpoint here, but
No,
this
no,
is
you're
just my
good.
personal opinion. But I was like in Tianjin and in Beijing, so I was in the very metropolitan areas.
Sure.
But just seeing, I don't know if you've seen pictures of China or been, but like every single city block has got like 4 police vans, like one on each corner, and they're
Mhm.
permanently cabled into these buildings, and they've got cameras everywhere. Everywhere you look in China, there's cameras. Like I went to the subway, and when you first get into customs in China, you have to have your passport scanned. Obviously, they take pictures of you.
Mhm.
And I remember seeing like myself on camera walking up to the station of the subway where you had to pay, and I looked at the attendant, and they asked me some questions, and I looked on the screen, and I could see my passport was pulled up, and there was a whole list. I mean, it was in Chinese, so I couldn't read it, but there was a whole bunch of information about me on this, and they were tracking, and there was like literally like a square on my face everywhere I moved. It
Mhm.
was tracking me, right? Um, and so for me, that was a really stark realization. And when I worked for a big corporation, and they gave us information about traveling there, and you have to basically assume you're being bugged all the time. Your hotel room
Right.
is going to be bugged. There's going to be cameras, there's going to be microphone,
Mhm.
and just experiencing that was rough. And this is a really long
Yeah.
preamble, but the question
No.
I have
No.
is always how much this shit is real,
Mhm.
right? Because I hear on like whether it's in China with the Uyghur situation, whether it's in Israel and Palestine, the Gaza, I know that there's so much tied into, the outcomes of some of these conflicts, you have to wonder what reality is. It feels like it's very difficult for anyone who's an objective observer to actually get a bead on what the truth is. It feels very, very difficult to suss out.
Yeah, so for me, and this even goes to like our own politics here, is that you kind of have to observe behaviors over time and then use, multiple third party organizations to kind of triangulate, if you will, on what the truth actually is. So, like for me, when it comes to like nutritional stuff, and I promise this will circle back to more like foreign policy and geopolitical stuff, but like, okay, so I know if I, let's say, eat 2,200 calories a day with 180 grams of protein, which is normally about what I eat right now, then over time I'm going to lose weight. Okay, well, what did the studies say on this? We start looking at nutritional studies when people are put into a caloric deficit over a period of time, then they lose weight. Um, so right there, it's like, okay, well, you have a third party organization and other people who have replicated this, so therefore I can probably safely assume that this is true. When it starts getting into like the total death toll over in Gaza, let's say, because a lot of people want to dispute this, um, we look at the historical reviews of this. So like different 30 or third party organizations, like I think the UN and some others that are just escaping me right now, but that they've generally said that, hey, like this whole, people say it's the Hamas death toll or something like that because it's the Gaza Health Ministry. Um, Generally, most other organizations recognize, hey, their death count is normally pretty spot on, and then actually in some cases it's an undercount. So okay, right there we have, a couple different instances of like, okay, well, different third party organizations verified this, and this is generally verified because the Gaza Health Ministry records every single body that comes in, and they generally try to find somebody that knows that person to recognize them and say like, hey, do you know this person? What's their name? Get their information, and then register that as another person. So there's that. When it comes to the China stuff, once again, this gets really complicated because one thing that I think we as Americans really have to watch out for, and this goes, this applies to Russia as well, and like any kind of enemy country, so to speak. So like anywhere in the Middle East, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, anything like that. We have to be incredibly skeptical because pretty much everything we're told from a mainstream, and even like a lot of what I call like alternative mainstream now, um, we have to be very careful of all the information that we're taking in because these people who work in think tanks, politicians, and obviously like, what people would commonly refer to as the corporate press are generally either telling you the truth and omitting a lot of things or just straight up lying to you. So, it's not always necessarily easy to find exactly what the truth is, but like I said, I think you can kind of triangulate through either your own experience or finding enough third party organizations that you trust and have kind of like a record of at least being honest and consistent over a period of time that you can kind of realize, okay, well, I'm not getting complete and total bullshit here. So like people kind of know me as a guy who likes to fuck with Tim Pool a lot. And, I've had so many tweets that went viral because of just messing with Tim Pool. But my problem with him is that I don't think he's honest. When he talks about Trump's foreign policy record, he always says, oh, it was, there were no new conflicts. True. But, oh, he was so good and there was peace in the Middle East. Not true. And Abraham's Accords were peace deals. Not true. The war in Ukraine never would have happened on his watch. Heavily debatable. I don't like when people omit things from the conversation. This is what I see a lot of people do on the pro-Trump side. And I'm sure, like, if I scoured the web for Democrats and people like that, then I would find complete total omissions by them as well. It's just, that's not the world that I speak to. I don't know about your audience, but like for me and most people that follow me, I'm not speaking to a left-leaning audience. I have a lot of left-leaning friends and I have left-leaning people on the show who are more anti-interventionist. But once again, I'm not going to change the mainstream Democrats' mind. I'll have conversations with these people and I'll have conversations with anybody, but like that's not my audience. So me telling them how wrong Kamala Harris is, it's like I respect my audience enough to know that they know that. I just don't think they always know that they're being lied to by alternative sources. So that's kind of where my focus has always been. So I know I kind of dance all around your point, but basically, like, just try to triangulate things and then try to find organizations and third parties or people that you trust and that have proven to be correct over a period of time.
Got it. I think it's a rational way to look at it. I guess I get into that mode where I get a little bit of paralysis around some things because I'm an
Sure.
old dude, man. I'm almost 50. I'll be 50 this year or next year. Sorry.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I made it halfway. And I've seen all these tricks before, and particularly around anytime I see a narrative in the media, whether it's corporate press, whether that be alternative press, where there is a uh, emotional emotionally tinged narrative, right?
Mhm.
Because one of the things that they've discovered in the psychological literature is that you talk about the death of 10,000 people or 50,000 people or 100,000 people,
Yeah.
it's less compelling because the human brain is not evolved to comprehend a group of individuals at that level. But if you take a single story, like this one girl that was, bombed and buried in the rubble, if you tell any sort of story, you can sort of sway people in your favor. And so
Right.
anytime, I don't care if it's the Uyghur Muslims, I don't care if it's the kids in Gaza, I don't care if it's people in Ukraine. Anytime I see that rhetorical tactic being deployed, I start to immediately get a little bit suspicious. Can you look at like the beginning of the Ukraine war? Remember the ghost of Kiev? And you have, I was in the military, man. Like I was right next to in Fort Bragg, the psychological operations folks, right? Like I know this stuff is real, and psyops have become a meme, but it's actually a real thing, and they're very sophisticated, and they're very deep in the psychological literature, and they are very adept at influencing people. And anytime you get, like I said, a conflict where there is there's a lot riding on the outcome, you're going to see this stuff deployed. And so and I'm not saying that you're wrong to try to do our best to triangulate and use multiple sources and try to find reputable sources who've proven to be correct in the past. It doesn't always do us good in the real time because it takes, I think, some time to suss out the truth, even if you're going through some reputable sources.
Yeah, absolutely. And much to your point, you always should be skeptical of all of these things, including people that you like and that appeal to you. And this doesn't come naturally to people. I mean, it definitely doesn't come naturally to me. So, like for me, I know you and I kind of talked a little bit about nutrition. And, for me, I did the carnivore diet for 2 years. It did very, very well for me until it didn't. And it really did for me take objective analysis over and over again and just being wrong about so much and listening to people who I disagreed with and who I thought were full of shit for the longest time until just over and over again you see, okay, well, there's this study, there's this research paper, there's, this cohort of people, there's just, so much data that flew in my own face that I just had to change my mind. So, like I said, you should always be skeptical, and it's not easy because once again, we want to know we're right. We don't want to be wrong about stuff. So sometimes it is just easiest to go to where our biases are most confirmed. But like I listen to quite a bit of left leaning podcasts. I still try to listen to some more low carb carnivore people, and people that disagree with me, so that way I kind of know when I understand the opposing arguments. So like when I talk to people about nutrition, it's always funny because like people kind of know me as the guy that goes to bat for seed oils, which is always just hilarious to me because I was in their position of vehemently being against seed oils for years, honestly. And if you go back to the earlier parts of my podcast back in 2021, you would have probably found episodes where I said, oh, fuck seed oils, fuck artificial sweeteners and all this stuff. But then I mean, it just took so much listening to people that I didn't agree with and reading the literature myself until I realized, okay, well, this is no longer a tenable position for me to hold because all the data that I can read goes completely contradictory to what I once believed. So, like I said, just always, people should always kind of keep a skeptical eye and always be willing to change their mind. And speaking of kind of like stuff that I changed my mind on, it was also like sugar too, where somebody that I followed for quite a while, his name's Lane Norton. He's one of my favorite people in the nutrition sphere. He wrote an article, a fantastic article about why sugar probably didn't cause the obesity crisis. And in the beginning of it, he asks like, okay, before you read, ask yourself, are you willing to change your mind? And if you are, how much evidence would you need to be presented for you to change your mind? And if you answered no to any of these, then you probably just shouldn't read this article.
Mm.
And I'm like, you know what? I dig that because there are some people who just aren't going to change their mind on that. And I wasn't one of those people at that point. But I mean, like I said, it took a lot of skepticism and eventually me kind of turning around and realizing, okay, well, maybe I was wrong about this. Maybe my base assumptions were not correct initially.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And I wanted to pivot to this as well, because I think more of the people who follow me on Twitter are more in the carnivore or nutrition or health fitness space.
Yeah.
And I think you're right on a lot of things. And I think Lane Norton has changed my mind on some things. And I
Mm,
think being open to having your mind change is really important. I feel like that's been a strength of mine. I'm not married to any of my ideas. I
mm,
will go anywhere where the reason and evidence takes me. I'm an empiricist at the end of the day. I'm not an ideologue with anything. That said, I think that you have the same problem in the health and nutrition space as you do with what we talked about with geopolitics and the news stemming from geopolitical disagreements.
mm,
And there's some counter voices I think that are really important. Like Nick Norwitz is a great one. Nina Teicholz, they're talking about a lot of the fuckery that's going on in academia in some of these studies. There's p hacking. They're very sophisticated in how
mm.
they influence some of the research. So you can't always take a study at face value. You and this is the problem. I think Brett Weinstein raises this question pretty adroitly in many areas, is that the institutions we have broken down. We used to have the ability to have some faith in our institutions, and I think they've been proven wrong, right? Whether that be with the latest pandemic, and however you feel about the Pfizer Moderna situation, we've seen those institutions that we should rely upon and have trust in lose a lot of credibility, and we've seen them exposed. And here's a good example. The FDA receives 75% of its funding from industry, right? And to try to claim that there's no impact from that, like, that's insane. That's 75% of the agency's
Mhm.
budget is funded by the industry that they're regulating. I think it's madness to assume that you can trust everything at face value, but at the same time, you have to rely on something, right? Like, everything cannot be an N of one experiment. So when it comes down to, hey, what do we believe about nutrition, for example? That's insanely difficult. Particularly, I
Mhm.
know you're a smart dude and you're in the space. Like, not everything's a fucking metabolic ward. Like, a lot of these things are
Yeah.
associational studies. These are epidemiology studies where it's relying on food questionnaires, which we already have
Mm.
shown are notoriously unreliable. People can't remember
Yeah.
what they had for breakfast, let alone the last 6 months. So you're in a really difficult situation, and trying to figure out the truth is like, and this is why I think like conversations like you and I are having, connecting with groups of people on Twitter, they're very helpful, as long as you don't end up in these ideological black holes, or you're in an echo chamber. You're only talking to the carnivore people. You're only talking to the vegans. You're only talking to the Seco bros and the Lane Norton, devotees. And so I think it's a really hard problem to solve, but I think the more we talk about it, the more we're going to be able to get closer to what the actual truth is.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, a lot of this stuff did not come easy for me. So, and I don't know if this is necessarily pushback, but like when it comes to a lot of nutritional studies, the reason why I have a high degree of trust in them is because there are objective metrics, right? And you can judge each study according to its metrics. So somebody that's kind of popular and more of like, how do I want to put, like more low carb circles is Robert Lustig, right? Well, he did. I'm blanking on the exact details, but I'll get this outline loosely correct, or at least correct enough that we can kind of move the conversation forward. Um, he did a study where I think there was like a low sugar and a high sugar group, or or a group that didn't have sugar at all, and or it might have been like a low carb group, right? Well, basically there were all these different metrics that he measured, like weight loss and specific measures of like weight loss, where they use like doubly labeled water and body composition measurements. And um, basically, they were measuring energy output in a day. And instead of using the metrics that they had that were more accurate than doubly labeled water, he went with doubly labeled water, which actually overestimates energy expenditure on specifically ketogenic diets because of the change in like when you go into ketosis and the way your breath works, because that's kind of how they measure doubly labeled waters, through your breath and through ketones and stuff like that. Now, ketogenic diets actually show a higher energy output when you use doubly labeled water. And if I remember correctly, he omitted the measurements that wouldn't show that the other group in the diet actually did just as well in favor of using that. So that's just one example that comes to mind. But like once again, you can look at those objective markers and see, okay, well, they left this out, so therefore this is a problem with this study. And you're going to have the same in any study you really do. But back to an earlier point, you kind of have to triangulate these things to the truth. So, like when it came to saturated fat and LDL cholesterol, this is something that a lot of more low carb people really have an issue with, and I had an issue with it for a long time too. Because my bias is for animal proteins. I mean, I love it. I literally just ate a steak before we got on here. I had ground beef, lean ground beef for lunch. So it's not like I'm against animal proteins at all. I mean, I have eggs every single morning with my French toast. So, just to make this abundantly clear, I have no issue with animal proteins. I think people should consume animal proteins. Because it's the most bioavailable form of protein, specifically, highest in leucine, which is the most important amino acid for building muscle. Um, Animal proteins are highest in that. So, I mean, this is very, very important. But um, there is a problem with saturated fat, right? So, when you start consuming excess saturated fat, and this is kind of individual, you can raise your LDL cholesterol. Okay, so people say, okay, well, it doesn't matter. You should just be worried about your HDL to triglycerides. As long as you have good HDL and lower triglycerides, you're fine. Okay, I used to believe that too, but then there is a mechanism for how LDL penetrates the endothelial wall lining and then builds up plaque and then eventually which leads to heart disease. Okay, well, what do we know about this over a longer period of time? Well, when you look at Mendelian randomization trials, which are basically lining up people with similar genetics, similar behaviors, and then just comparing their blood levels and kind of extrapolating from that universally in every single Mendelian randomization trial, you see people with higher LDL cholesterol over a lifetime always have higher CVD than, which is cardiovascular disease, than people who have a lower LDL cholesterol. So once again, this was a hard pill for me to swallow, and it really changed the way that I kind of construct my diet. This makes a lot of more low carb carnivore people angry, but unfortunately, that is kind of the conclusion of the strongest data that I can find. But that being said, if a carnivore diet is the best way for you to get healthy, or a low carb diet is the best way for you to get healthy, then I think losing weight, getting thin, and getting healthy that way is better than you not doing it all. Is it optimal, in my opinion and assessment of the literature? Probably not, but once again, I kind of look at this the same way as I look at Ozempic as well, where like I would love if people basically committed to a diet like I encourage: lean meats, lots of fruits and vegetables. You can have your occasional junk food, don't make it a regular staple, but if you're out with your kids or something like that, or you're out with your wife for your anniversary and you guys want to have a cheesecake, dig in, enjoy, have a drink occasionally. Just don't make that the bulk of your diet. The bulk of your diet should be, like I said, leaner meats, fruits and vegetables, fatty fish. And then, if you want, you could have some plants and seeds and maybe even occasional the fattier meat too. But also get lots of fiber in. But people aren't going to do that. We tell people to do this kind of stuff all the time and they just don't. So, my reading of the literature when it comes to Ozempic is that yes, there are side effects. Yes, there were some studies done where the side effects were so severe that people had to drop out of the study. I'm aware. We should discuss that, and we should discuss that loudly and openly. That being said, the side effects from Ozempic compared to the side effects of being obese, I'll take the side effects of Ozempic 10 times out of 10. And we are suffering a bullet wound right now when it comes to metabolic health in this country. Ozempic is the only band-aid that we have that actually works. So, I think this should be put in the water? No. But should that band-aid be available to people if they want to take it? Once again, if they want to, absolutely. So, like I said, none of this stuff's perfect. My opinion always is, if it works for you, good. If you want my thoughts on optimal, I can lay that out for you, and you decide what you do with it from there. I'm not here to make you a better person. I'm here to give you the information, and you can decide what you do with it from there.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great way to look at it. I think there's some pragmatism that needs to go into the health and nutrition space,
Absolutely.
especially like you said, as we're in a red alert emergency and trending more and more metabolically unhealthy.
Yeah.
We should be looking at ways to get more metabolically healthy. As
Mhm.
an individual, There's different approaches for different people, and I certainly wouldn't be in the camp of like let's ban Ozempic or anything like that. Like
Cool.
I have a good friend who's taking Ozempic and has lost a bunch of weight on it. What I worry about though with Ozempic in particular is that there's a couple of things. Number one, it seems to show that a lot of the weight loss is tied to lean muscle, which is never good.
We could
Particularly,
discuss that. Yeah,
yeah, particularly as you get older, right? Because sarcopenia is like
of
a real
course.
problem, right? And particularly as you get older, it's more difficult to put on lean muscle or maintain lean muscle, and so that's a real problem as you go long term. So I think long term, the impacts are questionable. Now we'll have to wait to see what this looks like. There's been people, stories of people, you probably heard these, getting off of Ozempic and having the rebound effect,
Sure.
gaining more weight because my understanding of it is that it actually causes lipogenesis, right? So you're actually creating new, smaller, more
Hmm.
insulin sensitive fat cells. But the problem is when you get off of it and you get back on you haven't addressed the underlying problem, which is you just eat too much and you're not exercising enough. And then it's going to inflate those fat cells, and you end up sort of fatter and with
Hmm.
less lean muscle as you started, which is a terrible situation. If I'm a pharma executive, this is a dream product for me because
Sure.
you sort of lock people into like you're in this Sophie's choice of I'm either going to die from diabetes and other obesity related diseases, or I can continue to take this pharmaceutical for the rest of my life, which happens to be incredibly expensive.
Right. Okay. So I want to go through some of these points, and I wrote them down to make sure I can address these. The lean mass loss, that is typically in every study that I've read, and including the people that I've talked to. A friend of mine, his name is Max Coleman. He studied under Brad Schoenfeld, who's the world's leading muscle hypertrophy researcher. We talked about this, and he actually kind of changed my mind on it because I was more in the more skeptical camp initially. Because I mean, after 2020, how could you not be skeptical of every single
Hmm.
medical treatment that's being put out there? So once again, this is another thing I changed my mind on. The lean mass loss is typically because people aren't eating sufficient protein and they're not getting insufficient physical activity. Once again, should these people do it? Absolutely. That's what we want. And I would love to see people going to the gym. I mean, dude, I am powerlifting nut. I mean, at 200 pounds, I deadlifted 535 pounds, 400 pound squat, 305-pound bench press. I absolutely love lifting heavy stuff and putting it back down again. Like that is my every single Sunday morning I'm up at 4:30 to go to the gym and enjoy my time, my peace and quiet to, turn up heavy metal and just go to town. Like that is my entire life, and that's what keeps me sane. That being said, unfortunately, you can lead the horse to water, but you just can't make it drink. So, if people were to increase their protein and were to start resistance training, as they should regardless, we would see that lean mass loss go away. This just happens when people, go into a caloric deficit and they're not doing those things, then they do lose lean mass, either way. So, even if they were doing it naturally, once again, and I'm sure you probably are aware of this as well, that yeah, they would lose that lean mass regardless of Ozempic or not. When it comes to the long-term, side effects of Ozempic, I understand the skepticism, and I definitely think it's warranted. But we do have, I think it's 1 5-year trial now showing that it's pretty safe overall. Like I said, there are side effects for people. Occasionally, you're gonna have side effects with everything, no matter what. But generally, after the 5-year trials, once again, the side effects compared to being obese, the side effects of Ozempic are greatly preferable to those of the side effects of being obese. Now, when it comes to the fat cell overshoot, I can't disagree with anything there. And not that I think we're having like this hot debate or anything like that, but like fat cell hyperplasia is a real concern because when people lose weight, if you don't, like you said, address the underlying behaviors, then when you get off of Ozempic, you can do what's called fat cell hyperplasia, where you multiply fat cells and you can actually get fatter than you were initially. So, this is kind of why we need to cement these behaviors into people best we can, educate them like, hey, there are, in my mind, there's more of a spectrum of foods. There's no like uniquely bad or uniquely good foods. Anytime you hear people kind of saying like, this is bad, I hesitate to buy wholesale into what those people are selling because typically they're trying to sell you like their program, a membership, or their supplements or something like that. All foods are on a spectrum, right? Where, I would look at like your what we would call junk foods, chocolates, burgers drenched in all the delicious toppings, milkshakes. French fries, stuff like that. That's more like hedonistic, enjoyable food that you should probably limit the consumption of, right? So we're going to put that over here in this right category. I'm not sure if my camera's working again or not, but over in the right hand category, we're going to put that over there and say, like, hey, you want to enjoy these things sparingly, but you shouldn't just cut them out completely, because there are, psychological studies on people when you completely give them hard rules around stuff that they have what's called disinhibition response, and then they end up just binging on the stuff anyways. And then we have more of like over in this left area, where we're gonna talk about like leaner meats. We're gonna talk about your fruits and vegetables and stuff like that should make up the bulk of your diet. And then maybe starchy vegetables, high fiber stuff that is gonna help increase your overall quality of life, body composition, and fill you up with very, very little calories. So in all foods are going to be on this spectrum somewhere. And really, this could be up to each person to decide what they want to kind of enjoy the most of. So, like I said, my ideal diet, you enjoy lots of fruits and vegetables, you enjoy lots of animal proteins. You get some protein powders into because those kick ass. If you like peanut butters, any kind of like nut butters, dairy, stuff like that, all that stuff's great. You probably want to avoid the fried foods. Enjoy it maybe occasionally, but generally avoid the hyper palatable foods where we're talking about, stuff like peanut butter, outside of, limited quantities, milkshakes, burgers that are just top to bottom in, high fat dressings and stuff like that. Probably want to enjoy those sparingly, but like I said, you're going to have a spectrum of foods, and you just got to find what works for you and what's going to lead you to your ideal body composition, which really, this is kind of like a genetic thing as well. There's some people who are what's called obese resistant, where like my buddy Jack Napier, he has a very obese resistant phenotype where he can eat 3,500 calories a day and won't go above 160 pounds. Like, I wish that was my problem. I was
How would
250
it be?
pounds. Yeah. I'm 205 pounds right now, trying to get down to like 195 again. And I'm at 2,200 calories a day. And I have to be pretty strict about that to continue my weight loss. So, and I move around a lot, but some people's metabolisms are just different. So, but once again, the ideal situation, you work out as much as possible to, gain as much lean mass as possible. So that way you raise your basal metabolic rate, and, you eat a diet that works for you. And then, the chips kind of fall where they may from there.
Yeah, I've heard similar things. I've had Dr. Lindy Louise on my podcast, and
Interesting.
she summarized it pretty succinctly. She's like, "Hey, keep it simple, man. Like if you just
Mhm.
eat a predominantly whole foods diet,
Yep.
with adequate proteins, you're probably going to be way better. You're complicating things too much. I think people too often get in this analysis paralysis, and they're
Yeah.
focusing on I see these arguments all the time amongst people who are not fully metabolically healthy yet, and they're in the weeds talking about what perfect looks like, and some minute paper cut, differentiating, this versus that, how much of this, how much of that, like what's absolute perfect look like. It's like, dude, you're not even close to there yet. There's so many people that still
Mhm.
haven't taken that initial step, and I think it's oftentimes a way for them to avoid actually doing something. It's like this mental masturbation that people do, and they get so in the weeds. They're going to watch 7,000 podcasts instead of
Mhm.
just, like you said, picking some heavy shit up and setting it down, eating whole foods and being active, and getting adequate sunlight, and not doing stupid shit, too many screens, like just basic stuff like would really move the needle like 90% of the way there, I think.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with that. And it's kind of why something that was very refreshing for me to learn, Stan Efferding, who's another person that I really look up to in kind of like the health and wellness industry. Um, he had often repeated the stat, and I don't know exactly where he got this from, but like the vast majority of health benefits from all diets are realized from weight loss alone. So what that says is that you can decide the approach that works for you, and that pretty much all diets work when strictly adhered to. And the other thing that I found relieving about kind of learning about, okay, well, artificial sweeteners actually aren't bad for you when you dig into the literature on them. Seed oils aren't really bad for you when you dig into the literature on them. And a lot of most foods really aren't bad for you when you just eat them in a reasonable amount. The best part about that is that, okay, the barrier now to get healthier is now basically non-existent. Hey, if you're drinking regular pop every day, stop. High fructose corn syrup actually isn't inherently bad for you, but nobody sits there and says, okay, well, I just drank 140 calories of a Coke. Now I have to adjust for that in my total daily energy expenditure. Nobody does that. That's a pound of strawberries that you could have ate instead. Okay, well, drink a Diet Coke instead. Okay, now you have 140 more calories to play with. When it comes to the seed oil stuff, okay, well, yeah, it's in everything, but if you limit that, then okay, well, now you just eliminated a lot of hyperpalatable foods because this is kind of the devil in the details when it comes to seed oils. Okay, well, when you look into the literature of people who consume seed oils and you look at like blood lipid levels when people consume seed oils, there's countless studies on how canola oil is actually cardioprotective. And I know people like you mentioned Nina Teichels earlier, who I think says some good stuff, but I think she's wrong about seed oils. We've been consuming linoleic acid for much, 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 much longer before it was ever considered to be a industrial lubricant. Um, it's not just because okay, well, all of a sudden they decide one day that this is cheap and easy to make and people can consume it. I'm sure that was part of it, but like I mean, the research is out there now where you look at people who consume more polyunsaturated fats compared to saturated fats and their blood lipid levels get better. Now, once again, I'm not in the camp of you shouldn't have any saturated fat at all. I'm in the camp of if you're going to have saturated fat and a lot of it, then if you should probably try to opt in to get a little bit more fiber as well, as you always should, but like that's going to offset the potential negative side effects of saturated fat if you're somebody who's sensitive to saturated fat and that raises your LDL levels. So like once again, the barrier to health is pretty low. So okay, there's all these levers you could pull. Let's start pulling some of them. Go for a walk. I mean, that's just abundantly clear that if you get to like 7,000 steps a day, your all-cause mortality just plummets. Opt in to get a little bit more fiber.
Sauna.
Yeah, exactly. Sauna. Any kind of physical activity that's just doing more than you're doing now, your all-cause mortality is going to start to continue to plummet. So the barrier to entry for health should be and actually is as low as possible. So when I see people who are like, oh, you have to do carnivore or else you're not going to get healthy. You have to do vegan or you're not going to get healthy. You have to do, if it fits your macros, you're not going to be healthy. All that's bullshit. Find what works for you. And if you start losing weight, you're getting results and you feel better, you look better. You look in the mirror right out of the shower and, you're starting to see you look a little bit better. That's good stuff. Keep doing that.
Yeah, and I think they've done a lot of research on this, and most of the diets that are out there, they work.
Yep.
Just straight up, right? So it's finding out what works for you, and not worrying about what's optimally healthy, and be willing to update your mental model about this. That can be, from consuming a variety of resources, like you're learning more information, and then making n of one experiments on yourself. Like those are valuable because everyone's, like I said, everyone's phenotype is different. It's unique to them, right? Your genetics, your epigenetics, they're different, and so tweaking things. But I think we need to be careful about falling into quasi-religious, approaches to anything that
Yeah.
we're doing. And I think the nutrition world has got a lot of that. I think everybody has got, something to sell to save you from your sins. And there's apostates, there's heretics, there's, true believers. And that whole thing is really frustrating for me to see somebody who is an empiricist, and only cares about finding what's true, and what's good in the world. It's frustrating to be in a world where, like, for example, if you say something like, "Hey, maybe the seed oils aren't the devil," like in a lot of the circles I swim in, like that's apostasy. That's like
Oh,
how
yeah.
dare you?
Ask me how I know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really frustrating to see, and it's like, I don't know, people like to fight about stuff, I get it, but this is such an important topic because so many people, as we called out, are metabolically unhealthy, and this has real world impacts, and there are a lot of people that are really struggling with obesity and with a lot of these health conditions, and so the stakes are a little bit higher than just arguing about your favorite sports team or maybe some political disagreements. It really impacts people in a big way, and so I try to take it seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of one of the benefits I've seen of the RFK campaign, where, despite disagreements with him on a lot of topics, to have somebody force health back into the conversation, it's like, man, where the hell has this been? We have been just an absolute health disaster for decades now. And, specifically, like you think about 2020, where it wasn't that, COVID necessarily just popped the financial bubble, but I mean, it really popped the health bubble as well. I mean, where we really realized, like, holy hell, as a first world country that now, sorry about that, that is, you know, now we're to the point where we're not dying because we're malnourished. We're dying because we're too well nourished. To have someone like RFK push that into the conversation is just so, so, so incredibly important. And, it needs to be heard by people, and people need to start contemplating, what they're putting into their bodies and how they treat their bodies. Because, I mean, we get one life, and I don't know about you, but I turned 30 19 days ago. And I'll tell you what, these 30 years have just been an absolute gift. I mean, I've been through some brutal, brutal stuff that just doesn't really necessarily merit mentioning here, but like, to know where I've been and to be where I'm at today, where, hey, my wife and I have a great relationship. We travel, we're gonna have a beautiful family, and we're gonna, in what I think is, perhaps one of the most important things I'll ever do, right the ship of my family's history, where, it's been scared of lots of divorces and, struggle of health, for a lot of people in my family. Like, we're going to change this. This is going to be on my wife and I to change my family's history and change like what I want the Matovcik legacy to be. That's huge. And I think other people should kind of look at that as well, because like, health, I really do feel, is a birthright. We are given these bodies that can do such amazing things. I mean, you look at Hafthor Bjornsson deadlifting, what is it, like 1,110 pounds. Russell Orhe at like 5'8", 180 pounds, squatting 700 pounds. I'm sure everybody's heard of mothers, trying to save their children, tearing their biceps, trying to save them. I mean, we are capable of just truly incredible stuff. I mean, I've put out, what is it, 9 songs in a band that I've been in now for 5 or 6 years that I think kick ass. And then we've, opened for Hinder, Lita Ford, Steel Panther, just done truly amazing things. And then, that's not to mention all the places that you can go in this world and all the beautiful things you could see and the wonderful people that you can meet. To just throw that all away because you don't want to get your metabolic health in order is just patently insane to me. I mean, this life truly, truly, truly is a gift. And I'm not a religious person, but like, I get why people are. And even like that conversation of religion, I mean, that's like the fact that people have dedicated their lives to the stuff like that, and that you can, and that, just there's so much good in the world to not enjoy it because you don't want to get metabolically well. Like I said, it's just patently insane to me. And I don't know how you could not want to feel as good as you could to do all the wonderful things that the world offers to us.
Yeah, and I don't think it's 'cause people don't want it, right? I
Mm,
think that there's something really, really wrong, and maybe this is a disease of affluence, right?
sure.
We've gotten so much material wealth in this country, um, and there's so much abundance that this almost feels like a disease of abundance, and also the fact that this hyper palatable food is out there. Obviously, people are being targeted. They're biology is being manipulated by companies that want to make a shit ton of money and get you addicted to their products. Like that, that
Mm,
is a thing. Also, I think there's a lot of people that I think you've referenced some troubles in your family's past. I had a horrific childhood, and there's a lot of trauma that sort of presents as food addiction.
yeah.
And so I don't think it's necessarily a question of people not wanting to. I think that's why the health and fitness industry, the influencer industry, is so saturated, and it seems like there's an endless appetite because people really do, I think, want it. I think people either are suffering from a case of not believing they can do it. I said some sort of addiction type of issue that's been unresolved, emotional problems. There's a bunch of different reasons for it. But I don't think most people don't wake up every day and be like, I'm going to choose to be fat. It's just one of those things that happens to them and they don't feel like they've got control over. I think that's really the core of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Maybe I didn't word that as perfectly as I could have, but the way I've always looked at it is that obesity honestly may not be your fault. I mean, some people do get obese as children, and I think we would all recognize that children don't have the same agency as, let's say, you or I
Mhm.
have. And when that changes, is it 17, 18, 16, 15? I don't know. Everyone's going to grow up a little bit differently. Like me at 15, I was a pretty, adult 15-year-old. That being said, someone else may be completely different. So, we recognize that children and even teenagers to a degree don't have the same agency that we do. So, if you become obese, it's not entirely your fault. But the caveat there is it is your problem. And that's unfortunate, but I mean, that is the truth. So I do think there is a responsibility on people to fix this. And you can deny that responsibility, but I mean, that's going to come at the expense of your health, unfortunately. But, this is kind of why I like the idea of all diets work, is because once again, you get to choose what you want to do to get healthier. And that's just, that's something really good for people because if you know that, okay, you can kind of pick what you want to do to get healthier, then once again, this leaves the door wide open for you to walk through and figure out what works for you. So this is kind of why I really kind of go to bat against diet dogma. If there's people telling people there's a one size fits all in nutrition, it's no, you're full of shit. There is no one size fits all for nutrition. People are going to have different needs. And then even like their genetics may determine what foods work best with them. I mean, at one point, there was a time where, fiber really upset my gut. Okay, well, I slowly reintroduced it. And then now there was a certain point where I was eating, I think it was like 50 to 60 grams of fiber a day, and I felt fine. So, sometimes it takes, maybe an elimination diet. Maybe it takes trying a flexible diet for a little bit. Maybe it takes, just cutting out all junk food or all seed oils to find out what exactly works for you. But once again, the door's wide open. You just have to walk through it and then, take some time, learn some information, and be patient and be forgiving of yourself. One thing that I know that would have helped me out a lot is that, hey, when you step off the diet, it's okay. You're one meal off the plan and you could be one meal back on the plan. If you failed your diet at one meal, you're not a failure as a person. You didn't have this giant calamity. You can recover, and your health absolutely is worth the effort of getting one meal back on the plan. And sometimes maybe that one meal off was worth it. Maybe it was worth it to have, one too many drinks with the boys out somewhere. Maybe it was worth having that extra old fashioned and cheesecake with your wife when you guys sat down to have lobster or something like that. Like sometimes your quality of life needs to take precedence over your strictest adherence to the diet. And I think that's something that a lot of people would benefit from hearing. I know I would have benefited from hearing that when I was doing the carnivore diet, because I mean, I would be good for a week or two and then I'd end up face down in a Dairy Queen Blizzard or some cheesecake or something like that. And then I'd feel like a failure. And then it's like, no, just carnivore isn't right for me. And that's okay. Maybe flexible dieting isn't right for you. Maybe, vegan isn't right for you. You just got to find what works for you and continue to do that. And then once you find out it doesn't work, do something else.
Yeah, I think that's hard for people to hear sometimes because I think a lot of people want to be told what to do. I think that's
Yeah.
why oftentimes these little pockets of religiosity in the nutrition information space they grow such a critical mass, is because a lot of people just want to be told what to do. And thinking's really hard, and self experimentation is hard. Figure out what works for you is hard, and it takes a lot of dedication. It takes a lot of research. It takes a lot of trying. I get why people fall into that, which leads me to my question about seed oils. Is that
Mm.
you mentioned RFK and the focus from a government perspective and a country consciousness perspective about getting healthy. He's crusader against seed oils, and I think a lot about Brett Weinstein. He talks about something in a religious context called literally false, metaphorically true,
Mm.
right? So something that actually isn't true, but if you behaved as if it was, you'd be better off. And I wonder if seed oils are kind of like that, right? Because as you mentioned, they're ubiquitous. They're in fucking everything. And it's
Mhm.
always in the hyper palatable, ultra processed foods that are generally, more inclined to make you, sicker and fatter. So maybe if you used avoiding seed oils as a proxy for eating more of a whole foods diet, maybe people be better off. And so, trying to steel man's position,
Mhm.
maybe that's not such a bad take.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because I actually agree with you in that respect. Where I disagree is just that the data is not there to condemn seed oils as bad for your health. If they cause you to overconsume, then yes, but it is just not true that they cause any kind of inflammation. And I've heard RFK say this, where he said, "Oh, they cause inflammation." Okay,
Mhm.
well, what are we talking about? Let's get specific, because if we're going to talk about inflammation, there's different kinds of inflammation. Is it acute? Is it holistic? Are you talking about your C-reactive protein? What are you talking about specifically when it comes to inflammation? Because if I told you that I'm going to make you do something that's going to raise your inflammation levels, raise your cortisol, raise your heart rate, just at that alone, you'd be like, no, 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 don't do that. But that's what exercise does. So,
Right, right.
once again, this kind of stuff's important. So, but when you look at like some of the data on seed oils, you see that they are cardioprotective, as I mentioned earlier. There was a study done. Let me make sure I got this pulled up. In let me see. I want to make sure I get this right. Evidence of health benefits of canola oil. Um, this was a meta-analysis published back in 2013. Let me make sure I got this right. Yeah, it would take me a few minutes, but I don't want to get too bogged down and make sure that I cite this correctly. But if you look up kind of like the health benefits of canola oil, you'll find it pretty easily. And if you want to enjoy this in more like podcast form, look up like Alan Flanagan, Lane Norton is another guy, Matthew Nagra. I'm trying to remember some of the other names. Alan Aragon, I think, is a guy who's kind of gone to bat for them and artificial sweeteners as well. Just the data really isn't there to condemn them. But once again, to your point and to RFK's point, is that it's literally false. But if you were to use this as a heuristic to kind of guide the way that you eat, then I think you're generally going to be healthier as a consequence of it. Because once again, when we think about seed oils and what they're mostly found in, we're thinking about fried foods. We're
Mhm.
thinking about, once again, hyperpalatable foods. And I this is kind of going to go against what a lot of people, in more of our sphere would like. But like even if you look at butter, butter is generally the same way because it's very calorically dense. It's going to add a lot of calories without a lot of volume. There's no real nutrition in butter, and you're just getting a lot of, albeit tasty. Believe me, I use butter too, but you're getting a lot of tasty calories without getting any real benefit. So really, the heuristic for me would be avoid hyperpalatable foods. Look at nutrition labels and stuff. If you see they're jam packed with, added sugars and a whole ton of fats, and that mainly come from oils, okay, you might want to avoid that because once again, that's going to be a food that just has a whole ton of calories without a lot of nutrition. So, like for me, when I look at food labels, I'm looking for a decent amount of protein and preferably lower carbs and fats. So, most animal foods are obviously going to be zero carbs, higher in protein, lower in fats. Fat-free dairy is great. Even like lower fat dairy is fine. Higher fat dairy is fine too, actually, because the mucosal layer on the fats in the dairy actually protect you from the potentially detrimental effects from saturated fat. So that's where the difference is between like saturated fat from dairy and saturated fat from like regular animal proteins. And there is even linoleic acid in animal proteins too. That's another thing that a lot of people leave out. So it's metaphorically true, I guess, but yeah, literally false. I just once again strive to be accurate and truthful, which I get the sense that you are too.
Mhm.
So in the pursuit of that, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say like, hey, seed oils are fine for you, but you probably don't want to douse your foods in any oils. You don't want to douse them in butter. You don't want to douse them in canola oil. You don't want to do any of that. Use maybe a cooking spray to lube your pan with rather than just dousing it in oil. Yeah, it tastes good, but once again, you're getting a whole ton of calories that you just don't really need. Opt for the sugar-free, fat-free dressings. Opt for the lower fat dairy. And maybe if you want, go for the full fat dairy, but just be aware of what you're consuming. And like I said earlier about some of the animal proteins, leaner proteins. But if you want, don't be scared to enjoy ribs or brisket. I still do. I love that stuff. So it's just about kind of having like for me, And what I think other people could benefit from, at least from my perspective, would be having guidelines around food. Don't have hard rules, just have guidelines. Avoid hyper processed foods, or at least processed foods that are processed to make them more palatable, not more like protein rich, right? Like a protein powder is a processed food, but you get just straight up very digestible and delicious protein. That's good. Fat-free dairy. You're taking out all the fats and, maybe some of the carbohydrates as well from those dairies, and you're just getting the proteins. That's awesome. And honestly, most animal, all cuts of steak are technically processed. So when you just say processed foods, you lose a lot of the nuance there. But like you're generally looking to get rid, or, if you're going to go for processed foods, go for processed foods that make them, more protein rich and take out all the unnecessary calories that you don't need. That's like my general kind of guideline. And another guideline, 0 calories, generally 0 harm when it comes to foods. Now, people may hear that and say, oh, well, cyanide, 0 calories. Okay, don't be an idiot. Right? That's the general rule there. I respect people who listen to me enough to assume that they know not to eat paint.
Sometimes you have to specify, man.
Unfortunately.
There's either some dum-dums or people being intentionally pedantic out there, but it is what it is. Hey, we got like 15 minutes left, man. I have to ask you this question.
Sure.
I saw that you interviewed Ron Paul. What the hell? How did that come together, and what was that experience like? Because I saw that and I got absolutely geeked out. He's the one who got me into libertarianism way back in the day. I've been following him. It's been a dream to interview him, and I just want to hear what that was like, man.
It was kind of surreal, to be completely honest with you. Speaking with somebody that shaped an entire generation of people, kind of how that came to be. Dan McAdams, his co-host on the Ron Paul Liberty Report, is a pretty good friend of mine, as is his other co-host, Chris Rosini, who I just had on my show a week or two ago. Both those guys are dear friends of mine. They followed me on Twitter for a while, and I've had them both on the show. I had Dan on twice, and I've had Chris on once. But second time I had Dan on, we were just kind of shooting the shit off air. And he emailed me afterwards, like, hey, it was good to talk to you. Me and the doctor talk about maybe kind of getting some of the more liberty-minded podcasters together sometime and just having like some kind of meetup or something like that, because the doctor's super into that. And he's like, I just think that'd be cool. But he's like, anyways, I think it would be cool if you had the doctor on your program. And like right there, I'm like, wow, dude. So, what an opportunity. So fortunately, that week, I had that Friday off, and I'm like, hey, if you can get it set up, let's do it for this Friday. And I got to speak to the great doctor, and he is, I think he's 89 years old, still sharp as a tack, could still have a conversation with people, still cares about the message just as much as he did. But you could tell he's older. But I asked him about how he's managed to stay healthy, and he's well aware. So he truly is just like a beacon of just the greatest American alive today. So it was pretty surreal. And I can say that in the 3 years of doing the podcast, I've gotten to meet, some people that I've just looked up to for years, and people that I've listened to that have really shaped the way that I think about the world. And some of those being, Dr. Paul, Dave Smith, even Sean Baker, Rob Wolf, Mike Israetel, James Sexton, Ryan Stone, Rollo Tomasi, even though he was on my show specifically. Just lots of guys I've looked up to for a really, really long time. I've got to meet through doing this whole podcasting sphere. And, this is another thing that I think is just like a gift to the world, the internet, and being able to kind of communicate with mass groups of people. And then even to have some of them tell me that like they dig my podcast and they dig some of the stuff that I say on Twitter. And even, after that, some of them to even go out of their way to promote my band. Like it's truly mind boggling, because I'm just a small town kid from, fucking Vandergrift, Pennsylvania, who works on cars and now gets to quasi live his dream, still work on cars, but also talk to, the greatest living American today, and talk to, the, loudest and, the best voice for libertarians, and talk to my favorite author. To get to do all these things, it's just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I got to agree, man. I've only been doing this since like February,
Mm,
but already, not just lesser known people that I started talking to, which were great, by the way. There's a lot of like hidden gems out
yes.
there. Having those conversations with those folks in public, and then but some of the bigger ones just blew my mind. Like I flew out to London and I interviewed Helen Pluckrose,
Wow.
which if you know who that is, like her and Jim Lindsay and Peter Boghossian with the grievance studies, right, exposing
Mm,
fraud in academia,
wow.
and I'm I got Bob Murphy coming on, and then I'm flying to Dubai to meet with Zuby, and it's like these people will just like sit down and talk to you, and it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
I never in my wildest dreams thought that some people, like, like even like Bob Murphy, like he's a legend in the libertarian
Yeah.
community, and I've watched him forever and ever and ever. I used to listen to the Contra Krugman podcast with he and Tom Woods, and just never in a million years thought I would be able to talk to these people and have a conversation in public. And I'm so stoked about it, man. I'm very happy that I'm in this space. I know you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's just really good to hear hear you tell that story, because it is. All the time I'm blown away just by the depth of conversation, the amazing people you get to speak with. It is just a blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the coolest parts about that whole deal is that almost every single one of them, they want you to succeed, right? And like that, I think is an unspoken thing. Just about every single person that I've met in this podcasting sphere, I can't think of anybody that I have like genuine bad blood. There may be like some disagreements and maybe like they unfollowed me because of something I said rubbed them the wrong way. But there's no like people that I can think of, at least in 366 episodes that I've done, that I feel like there's any bad blood or anything like that. And like I said, I Rolo, when I had him on our one show, Cognitive Vigilance, and him and I became pretty good friends. And I asked him if he would promote my band, and he was like, "Yeah, man, no problem. I'll do it right now." And just went out of his way to promote me. Dave, same deal. I asked him, "Hey, do you want to come on the show?" He came on the show, and then I asked him if he wanted to do the other show, Cognitive Vigilance. He did that. Dan McAdams going out of his way to get an interview set up, him and Chris Rossini, setting up an interview with Ron Paul for me. I mean, just it's cool, man. People in this space and in the podcast space, if you're good to them, um, they will generally go out of their way to help you out and make sure that your message is heard, and to kind of just take care of you. And that is very, very refreshing. And to have this kind of network, man, you can't put words to it. So, I consider myself one of the luckiest people alive today to play in a band with people that I consider like family to me. I mean, I just truly incredible people. I mean, my bass player and drummer have ran a charity for the last 25 years, given money to sick kids for, now almost 3 decades at this point. So, I mean, they're just incredible people.
What's the charity,
Um,
by the way? Give him a shout
it's
out.
sure, sure. Yeah, Rock for Life. It's called the Rock for Life charity. We put on big concerts every single year, and lots of bands come out, and we just have a good time. And he donates. My drummer Matt now is this sole person who runs it. They give $1,000 to kids who have cancer, leukemia, or whatever, and it's just really, really cool. So um, stuff like that, and then. My wife is wonderful. My family's wonderful. Job's wonderful. I work in a shop now with people that, we'd go out drinking if we really wanted to. And, everybody looks out for everybody's best interests. So, um, I just consider myself to be an incredibly lucky person to live in the world that I live in and to be amongst the people that I'm with. And, to be here on your show as well, man. I appreciate everybody that invites me onto their show to kind of just ramble on for, what is it now, an hour and a half? I
Getting
appreciate everything
close.
that everybody does for me. Yeah. So, yeah, man, life is good.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm really happy I came across you. Twitter keeps just surprising me all the time, right? Like, because
Yeah.
I've avoided it for years. I thought it was a hellhole. And when I started my fitness journey last December, I decided, fuck it, I'm gonna get on Twitter and see what happens. And I've just met the best damn people, and so I'm very happy that Elon has sort of fixed the platform a little bit. It's not perfect, but man, it's a lot better than it used to be. I used to keep an eye on it, and it was like, God, this is a hellscape. Feels like it's better, and certainly my personal anecdote is I've met just most amazing people, and I can't wait to project out like as far as you've been doing this, several years in the future, and wonder all the people and the relationships that I will have forged, the conversations I'm going to have. Like I'm so excited about it. I just absolutely can't wait, man. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, dude, no problem. I appreciate the invitation, and yeah, we'll definitely keep up in the coming years. And I wish you all the continued success. Um, and maybe I'll hook you up with some people to get them on your show, and yeah, maybe we can continue collaborations in the future, man.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I would love that. It's weird. I'm trying to not do every episode about libertarianism. So I've got such a wide variety of interests. And it's like, man,
Of
I got
course.
I've got Lawrence Krauss coming up. World famous astrophysicist, theoretical physicist, and I'm trying to get into more of that. But I'm so interested in the subject of liberty, man. So sorry, audience. Like I'm going to do what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
I'd be happy to collab with anybody in the liberty community. It's been a pleasure so far. So it's a lot different than sniping at each other on Twitter. The real life interactions seem to be a lot better. So stoked about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it may be Twitter can be rough, and I'm definitely known to throw bombs every here and there. But I think everybody knows that if they ever genuinely need anything, or at least I hope they know. And if not, you heard it here first that
There you
if
go.
you ever genuinely needed anything, that I'm always here, and I will absolutely do my best to steer people in the right direction if they have questions. And if there's anything you think that I said that's wrong or I'm full of shit, then my DMs are always open, and I'm more than happy to talk to people. And if you're ever in the Pittsburgh area, hit me up, and I'll do my best to meet up with you. My brother and I's thing is we love to take people to go get barbecue at our favorite barbecue joint. So that's kind of like our introductory thing for people who stop by the Pittsburgh area. Is we want to give them the best barbecue experience that they've ever had, and let them know that you got family here.
100%. You count on it, man. I will make it up that way for certain. So
Beautiful.
and it's on me when we go out. So you tell me the place, and I got the bill, man.
Oh, them's fighting words around here, man.
All right, dude. Hey, last thing. Why don't you tell everyone where to find you, and shout out any your band or any other things you want to promo.
Yeah, for sure. So I got a lot going on. My band is called A Common Crown. I'm not exactly sure when you're going to air this, but December 14th, we're going to be in the Akron area playing at the Vortex, opening for George Lynch of Lynch Mob.
Oh, no way.
Yep.
Blast from the past, dude.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
February 26th at Jurgles here in the southwestern Pennsylvania area. Cultist Black, I think that's February 9th and that's a Sunday at the Raindrop Inn. And those are the only shows that I can think of off the top of my head. I know I'm missing some kind of going out further into 2025. But yeah, big stuff out of that. And that's going to be something I'm going to be pushing a lot throughout the next year because I don't think the world's ready for how much ass we're going to kick. We have so much new material. And I can't wait to share this with everybody. I mean, the Common Crown is my passion project because I am a heavy metal kid at heart. So look forward to that at commoncrown.com. The In Liberty and Health podcast, I'm going to do about one, maybe two podcasts a week where I talk about all things foreign policy, health, libertarianism, and whatever kind of comes across my mind. 5 till midnight, where me, the guys from Biting the Bullet, Sam Urban, and Adam Nutter all kind of just get together on on a show and just kind of talk shit and talk about the goings on of the world. It's always a blast, and we have guests sometimes. If not, we just kind of have fun between ourselves. But yeah, that's 5 till midnight, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Mondays. And Cognitive Vigilance, whenever that comes back. Post Zero occasionally for me on Sundays. That's 11 a.m. Eastern time. And Matovcik on Twitter. My last name is spelled Matovcik. You can find me there. That's where I'm most active. I'm on Facebook as well. And my YouTube channel, Matovcik. I have a link tree. If you just look up my name, you should be able to find me pretty easily. There's not that many people out there with the last name Matovcik, so I'm pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, I can't thank you enough, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was one of the best I've ever had. I genuinely mean that, and I hope we stay in touch, dude. This has been great.
Likewise, Brent. Thank you.
All right. Take it easy.